As entrepreneurs, there's a reason why we decided to leave our 9 to 5 for an 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. I'm here to tell the stories of why we all hustle and grind for our companies. On today's podcast, I'm speaking with Lane Kawaoka. So, Lane, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. I really appreciate it. And you're in a niche that I have a lot of passion for, and that sort of creative finance, real estate, the going about finance and investments and the way we use money in a different manner. And so I'm really excited to have you on today. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Aloha, everybody.
Anytime. So, quick question for you. I know we heard your intro and kind of some of the background for it. One of the things I like to do is have the entrepreneur say, "What do you do?" High level, what is your ninja skill? What are you really good at?
Yeah, I guess I would say I'm the author of the Wealth Elevator book,
Yeah.
and real estate syndicator of $2.1 billion of real estate on 10,000 units.
Mm-hmm. 10,000 units total? Yeah. Is that how many you're holding right now, or is that sort of, or was that over a career, or is it? I'm just curious. Like, you don't usually talk
Um,
to people who get 10,000 units.
yeah, I mean, we haven't really sold too much, but
Interesting.
yeah, I mean, it's on a spreadsheet. We just totaled it up. Yeah.
Oh, so can you walk me through the series of events, how you got to 10,000 units? You know?
I think that's what you want to zero in on, right? Like, because there's a
Yeah.
lot of like kind of like titles on podcasts, like from
Yeah.
0 to 10,000 units. Like, to me, that's not really helpful for anybody. I mean, at this point, we run a big team, and like, but it's more how do you get started. So I mean, growing up, I got brought up in more of a frugal household. We weren't poor, but we weren't wealthy, right? Like, my parents went to college. They taught me the whole go to school, study hard, invest in the 401k, which I know you're a huge fan of, I suppose,
Yeah.
right?
No.
But yeah, at a young kid, I was like just kind of lazy, and I was like Googled like what's the highest salary I could get without going to get a master's degree and a doctorate, and it's all the engineering degrees. So I blindly went into that. Maybe I was an Asian kid and happened to be okay at math and science or something like that. But like, that's what I 2007 graduated from the University of Washington with a bachelor's in industrial engineering, and started to work for started to work for the railroad as a corporate management trainee. And I just hated every second of that first day I was there. And I was like, oh man, this is gonna suck. But I was really good at saving, right? So very
Mhm.
early on, I was able to save 80, 90 grand to go buy my first home to live in. Again, this is again what we're all blindly taught to do: max out your 401k and save up to buy a home so you can get on that supposed escalator wealth building, which it is a way to some extent. But fast forward a couple years, 2009, started to bought that house to live in. I was only there on the weekends because my job made me go all over for work, traveling. I was only home pretty much on Saturday, so I decided to rent it out. And that was when I was awakened and realized that it's like, wow, I'm making cash flow. The tenant's paying down my mortgage. I gotta keep doing this again and again and again. Bought a couple more units in a couple more years later on in Seattle. Then, fast forward to 2015, I had 11 rentals in Birmingham, Atlanta, Indianapolis.
Mhm. Interesting. Now, so I always love to hear that story of when people pivot from, um, they pivot from a regular job often that they hate because we're not good employees as entrepreneurs, as we were talking about. It's one of those things. We're just not our zone of genius. That transition between being a 95 and an entrepreneur. Walk me through what that was like. Like what happened? Was it like just one moment where you rage quit and said I quit? Was it a sort of a transition? What happened to get you from the point of being in a 95 you didn't like to something bigger?
Yeah, it was really gradual. And I'm not a big proponent for people to leave their day jobs
Mhm.
sooner rather than, I mean, at some point, maybe you do, but I would think most people, especially if you make six figures at your day job, try and do the side hustle as long as you can, if not forever.
Yeah.
By having a job, it gives you the money to, pay for staff, gives you the financial security to make more risks on the business
Mhm.
side and negotiate better deals where you're not desperate. because
Mhm.
that's your only source of income. But zeroing in on my story, and when I first started working, I was working for a private company, very high stress, low quality of life, but they paid me a lot. And that's exactly what I needed when I first started out. Real estate in any business is a capital intensive business. I'm not wholesaling houses, flipping houses. That's what you do when you're kind of on the basement level of the wealth elevator. We have like a little pull-out chart to see where you are at in the pecking order. Like
Okay.
I was kind of on that first floor of the wealth elevator where, you buy little rental properties and you save your money. And, how do you save money? But a good income source, that's just a day job that you may or may not likely don't like. Um, but after that, I think I at the point, so 2012, 2013, I had a few units at that point. So I was kind of moving, right? But
Mhm.
nowhere near financial freedom. Even a dozen units is not financial freedom.
Mhm.
But I was kind of seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, right? I was compiling cash flow. I saw how if I save 30, 40 grand, I could buy another house and, add, a few $100s per cash flow per month per rental property.
Mhm.
But I think at that point there was like a mental shift. Like I was like, well, I'm making more money than my boss and boss's boss. And I two stories that kind of came up. Like one, like I remember like we were doing like budget reviews and they're like, you're just a junior engineer, like you don't know what you're talking about. And I was like, F that. Like you don't like your personal finances is in shambles. Like I make way more money than you personally. Don't tell me I don't know finances.
Yeah.
So that pissed me off. And
Yeah.
then there was another like when I first started working, I was like a construction supervisor. So I had a crew, a lot of cool people on that. I don't know where these people are at today. Some of them are pretty young,
Mhm.
just like me at the time. But fast forward 5, 7 years later in my career, I learned like one of these guys passed away,
Mhm.
um, accident on the railroad, which tends to happen. You know,
Mhm. Yeah.
several guys die every single year. I mean, it's a big company too. It's pretty dangerous. Hard metal things, very unforgiving with soft human tissue, right?
Mhm.
So, and it was just kind of weird, surreal. I mean, maybe part of it was like nobody really cared in the office because it was a work group, you know, thousands of miles away. But that was, one of my guys,
Mhm.
my crew at one time. And I just kind of was like, I don't know, it was just it it kind of got to me and I was like, man, this sucks, right? Nobody gives a rip at this place. I mean, and I didn't take it personally, like, but hey, I got it. That's how it is, right?
Yeah.
So that that combined with the fact that I was making money, like my motivation was just kind of slowly going down as my passive income was going up. And as they call it, the FU money, right?
Yep. Yep.
2000 and I can't remember exactly off the top of my head, but I know I had 11 rentals at this point in
Mhm.
2015.
Mhm.
And all this time I was working in private. So I was like, oh, I need to find something easier to do that doesn't stress me out, that allows me to bring my second laptop to work and so I can do the real stuff, right? The real business, right? And I think that's what a lot of people don't realize. What is the real business that of is your life? Is it excelling at your day job? Maybe, but there's also this business called your personal finances,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
So at this point, there was a tilting moment for sure. And I started to work for the government. So that's a tip for folks, right? Like try and find an easier job, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And what's nice about that is like, at that time I got my PE license and like I actually had a master's degree because
Uh-huh.
I was working on the road all the time. And, like a lot of these companies, just to try and keep you, they'll pay for your college education, upper level degree, but you got to stick around for a couple of years. So I stuck around for a couple of years. Then I was like, I'll peace out after that. I'm done with this.
Yep.
And then I saw at that point, started to kind of titrate down in terms of like easier employers. So I started to work for the city, then the state, and the feds, and just slowly kind of dwindled down. But I finally quit around 2018, I think.
Okay. Interesting. Now,
Yeah.
it's just out of curiosity, I come from the mindset that a college degree is not a bad thing as long as it's part of a larger strategic plan. So if you're just going for like a liberal arts degree just to get the degree, that's a useless degree. That's a waste of money. If you're going for something that's part of a plan, that's different. Was getting your engineer's degree as an industrial engineer, was that something that was part of a plan, or what was the thought process behind getting that degree beyond just this was a high paying, this was the highest paying salary I could see, after some research, has that helped you in entrepreneurship?
Yeah, so getting the job, so getting the whole degree, people ask me this all the time. My response to that is like, yeah, it wasn't directly aligned, but to build up a real estate portfolio, any kind of investment portfolio, you need capital. And
Mhm.
like I said earlier, like this is a capital intensive business. So the whole idea is like work at something that you can get the paid the most amount of money. It's like some of my clients are doctors making multiple six figures. They may or may not like it, but sorry, buddy, suck it up and do it.
Yeah.
Um, but that's kind of where like as an engineer, like I did learn a lot of cool things. Like I worked for a Fortune 50 company. It's big infrastructure in terms of like management structures and the way they do things. SAP, that's a big thing. And there's a
Yeah.
reasons why they do stuff like that
Yeah.
that I didn't realize, but as a young kid, like being put into that type of stuff, it's very beneficial, which is why you see a lot of family businesses, they require their kids to be promoted a couple times before they come and take the reins of their own family business.
Mhm.
The other thing, like as far as the leadership, the cool thing that I really benefited from, they put us in very high positions of authority right out of college. So I would have never gotten that in a typical like job out
Mhm.
there. So that really, I mean, what I do a lot is, is leadership at the end of the day. And it's hard to teach that unless you give a young 20-year-old kid a crew of 30 guys to travel across the country and build railroad.
Mhm.
So, but, you know, we ask all the time, is like college education really that important? Well, it allows you to get to that next step. And then
Yeah.
if the next step is to get a freaking job that you get paid six figures to power the next step, which is to need money to go and get the other stuff, then yes, it does. But then there's also some other skill sets that is built up in that process. And as I
Mhm.
always tell even my staff is like, look, you may not work with me forever. And that's life.
Mhm.
But maybe, any job you take, you should see it as an opportunity to learn and F stuff up on somebody else's dime. So
Yep.
in a way, that's what I was kind of doing at my jobs. And it is what it is. That's life, right? And if people aren't growing, they're kind of going stagnant, and that's not the team that you want. But that's if you're a growth mindset person, even if you don't run your own business, that I think that's a good way of kind of using your job as a platform to try different things.
Mhm.
Not and it's cool is if you mess up, it's not your head. You're not the business owner.
Yeah. It's a means to an end. As long as it's strategic, I think that's something. It's a huge debate point. So I wanted to ask kind of your experience. I think there's a lot of different opinions. I wanted to hear kind of what your experience was being able to correlate some of what you learned at school to what you were doing. So, I like to hear through stories sometimes.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
will add on to like,
Yeah.
I mean, I've got kids, so like I'm a parent, and I will add on the miscellaneous thing of like going to a college, especially D1 college, is like probably the best experience anyone could ever have.
Mhm.
I don't think all that is super useful though,
Yeah.
but life is more about experiences once you have money,
Yeah.
that, and just like that, if people have read the book by Bill Perkins, he cites an example of the guy who out of college, he takes a personal loan to go backpacking, and having those experiences just like I think that's a lot more rare situation. But going to college, I think you also interact with all kinds of people. So I think especially in business, you need that repetitions where if for a salary guy, just kind of doing the same thing all the time, more of a specialist, the personal interactions and skill sets in that world aren't that important. You're not going to get exposed, and you're going to go down in business if you don't have that skill set. Um, but I think, like you said earlier, like the old basket weaving, liberal arts degree, that's,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I'm kind of like, look, if you got the money and you're a parent, whatever degree, give them that first 2 years of college, but then pull them out if they're just like effing it up and
Yeah.
just being a waste of money. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm just kind of a sucker for that type of stuff. And, you want to give the kids a good experience in life. And, it costs money, right? It costs money to go to Disneyland, it costs money to go to like France. Things
Yeah.
cost money, you
Mhm.
know.
Yeah, but I think if we look at college like a return on with some sort of a return on investment on it, whether it be getting a good job and paying for companies and building your wealth that way, like what you did, or getting a degree that is something that you're then going to be able to generate, revenue with or start a business with. I think that's the more as long as it's part of a strategic plan somewhere. And you could completely do the wrong thing and go in the wrong direction, and you'll learn a hell of a lot that way. But it's
Yeah,
something I hear in entrepreneurs, so I figured I'd ask about it.
yeah.
Yeah.
And especially like, I mean, this coming from me, who's like, I think of myself a very practical person.
Yeah.
It can also mean like experiences, right? Like the
Yeah.
memory of like you and your buddies staying up to 4 o'clock in the morning, partying, getting $5 subs at Subway.
Or
Like
tacos.
that's, yeah,
Yeah.
that like those are the memories that like you won't have the opportunity to get even when you pass age 25 or 30.
Yeah. And to add on to that, think about where like Facebook got started. That was, Stanford. I mean, so, and it's just a lot of, some of these, depending on, like you said, going to a Division I college is very different. Going to like one of the really, really good colleges, you get a different, you can make some connections there that you'll have, not just friends, like, not just friends for the rest of your life, but also, um, you'll make some of the networking connections that you'd need to go forward and do some cool stuff. I've had a couple of people on the podcast, one that were in from Sloan School of Management, and they said they did some really cool, really cool stuff there, and they were able to meet a lot of people. And coming to find out, Sloan School of Management actually has an entire, they're very entrepreneur based, like that. They're all about startups and small companies and things, which I think is really interesting. So that might be worth it, if you get into Sloan. But
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm not I mean, I hear things like that, like at my
yeah,
University of Washington. I mean, it's the alumni network isn't super strong, but like some
yeah.
of those smaller colleges, like you said, or like a USC is,
Mhm.
strong network. But
Yeah.
I think most times, you're there for the parties and the memories, right?
Yeah. We may not want to admit it, but I think that's part of it too. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
True
Call it what
story.
it is, right? Like,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah. So let me pivot for a little bit because I want to get us started on a conversation about money and wealth building and the wealth elevator. So you coach clients on money. Sorry, let's start off with the book, The Wealth Elevator. We'll go from there. What is the Wealth Elevator about? What is that? What is that book about?
Yeah. So I mean, like there's a lot of books written out there for personal finances, right? Like, I mean, and there's a lot of influencers, like the Dave Ramsey types.
Mhm.
Um, I met the guy, great message. But a lot of the audience is kind of the masses, right? Folks under $1 million net worth, or, maybe they make less than $100,000 a year.
Mhm.
In the Wealth Elevator book, some say we poo-poo on these folks and we put them in the basement level, right? But
Yeah.
from where I was coming from, I mean, look, like I said, like it's not like I like was homeless or anything like that or
Yeah.
ridiculous, like, tagline. But like, what does a guy do when they make a good salary and, they're a good performer? And, how do you get from that first level of the wealth elevator where you're supposed to buy little rental properties, build your net worth up to half a million, million? And then what do you do after? And then what do you do after when you hit in game of $4 to $5 million net worth and you're just letting it coax on T-bills and life insurance at that point?
Mhm.
And what does it look like to go to 10 million? Right. So in the book, I mean, I'm an engineer, so I have these charts, right? So the chart of all these floors and, where in the pecking order that you fall. But there was never any content out there written from the point of view of each floor and breaking up the floors in paradigms, right? And in a more actionable type of sequence where here's what you do for investing. maybe have 40% alternative, 60% traditional. Here's what you're doing for infinite banking. Here's what you're doing for taxes. Here's what you're doing for like mindset, as a small portion of it. Like
Mhm.
I think a lot of us read that book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Yeah.
I think great book. I mean, great for mindset, but like, everybody is like, yeah, let's take over the world. But what the hell do you do?
Yeah.
Buy a course that they sell at wholesale properties? Maybe sell essential oils. Like that book is really
Yeah.
cool because it's sort of esoteric, right? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
the guy says a lot or says very little in very many words. I
Talks
got
a lot
that
and says
right.
little. That's how
Yeah,
I put.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think it's great, right? Like I think you always need to have that mindset shift first,
Mhm.
but I'm more on like actionable, processes.
Yeah.
And specifically part of that is like, where are you now? And what is the strategy you need to implement right now? Because it's going to be different. Most of my clients are $1.5 million to $5 million net worth range. Very different where I was in my early 20s, working the job, saving $50,000, $100,000 a year.
Mhm.
Very different. So that's what I kind of wanted to create in the wealth elevator, and at least set this model up of like the system of like, hey, where you're at. Most people start in that second floor of the wealth elevator where little rental properties are just a little bit too small to get started in. So they start as a passive investor in larger syndications and private placements. And it allows them to get even better tax benefits there by getting involved in deals that do cost segregations, bonus depreciation. We get a little bit into like real estate professional status and taxes and other advanced strategies. But like this is all like a world to me. Like I said, I started investing in 2009 and I got up to 11 rentals in 2015. And I thought I was hot stuff, right? Like what kid has 11 rental properties?
Yeah.
And I, 2015, I kind of went through a metamorphosis again, and I started to meet other accredited investors.
Yeah.
And I was like, whoa, what are these guys doing? So I started to absorb a lot of this stuff. And that's how I learned. And I started the podcast in 2016, started to talk about this, build up a community and tribe there.
Yeah.
And I realized that like, wow, there's another set of strategies beyond.
Mm.
And but it's not something that anybody can implement
Mm.
is but you have to implement it at the right timing too, right? You can't do this stuff when you're to me, a lot of people are like, they're like infinite banking, right?
Yeah.
If people Google the term, you're going to go down a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
But if your net worth is not $500,000 dollars, it's not the time to apply that strategy at that time. You got to take your money and go buy assets such as rental properties.
Mhm.
So just to use that as an example, um, but that was kind of where like, yeah, like just kind of creating this curriculum and this wealth elevator system, that to kind of encompass it all in a book. Because I think a lot of times when people hear things on a podcast, 30 minutes here, an hour here, you lose the big picture. And a part of this whole wealth building journey is that it's nice to know what's on the perch to one level, two levels beyond you.
Mm.
And unless you're to a certain level, like if you're not to the first floor yet, you don't want to see what's on the second and third one. It's just going to get demotivating. But
Mm.
also within this, if I can show people what's on the third floor and you're on the first, maybe we can kind of cut corners, right? Like for example, if people ask me like, what would you have done differently? Like, as I was kind of getting started in my 20s, like, well, I wouldn't have bought 11 rental properties because those were quite the pain in the ass. I would have only bought a few or four or five, and then moved up to the syndications of private placements and started my networking and expansion into that world, which is very different from direct ownership
Yeah.
of rental properties.
Mm.
So that's just, kind of one example of like, trying to cut the corners, compress learning cycles. And, there's all like the way I see it, there's one, I mean, at least it's the path that I took, right? I
Mm.
can only speak from experience.
Mhm.
And this is the path that I did to, progressing to financial independence and then beyond.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things, one of the reasons I started the podcast was to allow people to give that, here's the path that I did. And it is like Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I agree with you. There's not really actionable items with Rich Dad, Poor Dad, but just personal experience for me, it was more like I needed to hear that there was this other way because I came from the poor dad side of things and I didn't know this. I had nobody in my life that was really entrepreneur, or had any idea how the hell to deal with this entrepreneurial kid, and hearing that difference. And I think also hearing the story that you had in your path is incredibly helpful. So awesome.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. The community is huge, right? Like, I mean, same thing with like, I was buying rental property. I had a few rental properties before I read that purple book.
yeah,
And then I read, I was like, yeah, why doesn't everybody do that? That's what I'm doing now,
makes sense.
So I think that was cool. So for me, reading the book wasn't super impactful, but
Mhm,
like, again, like 2015, I started to interact. I got out of my shell. I mean, people know me, I'm kind of an introvert.
mhm,
I started to interact with other accredited investors, and I'm passionate about this stuff, obviously. So I met a lot of people, and it was like super cool to multiply like knowledge with other people and share.
mhm,
And especially when a lot of folks out there who are listening to these podcasts, a lot of your friends or family may be totally disinterested in this
mhm.
stuff and finances.
Yeah.
So when you finally are linked up with people who are on the same wavelength or trajectory, you know amazing things happen. And I think that's a big, like, that was a big part of it. Like, I was like, wow, other people out there are buying properties without even seeing it, or investing in a syndication with somebody they just met over the internet.
Yeah.
It's crazy. But you
Yeah.
know what? I'm crazy too. Let's hang out.
Yeah, right. We're the ones that are crazy enough to change the world, it's
Yeah.
to badly paraphrase Steve Jobs there. So we are getting towards the end of the episode, and I do have one question that I ask every person that is, what is one book or podcast that has had a major impact on your life that you can share with the audience?
I'm not a big fan of podcasts these days.
Mhm.
I just kind of, they're not super curated.
Mm,
And I tend to like more books because some guy spent a lot of time to make that book, and it should be more distilled down.
yeah,
Um,
true.
and so I would say if people are interested in real estate, other than the Wealth Elevator book, obviously, but
Exactly.
The Millionaire Real Estate Investor by Gary Keller, I think that's a good fundamentals of real estate to
Yeah,
start.
good.
You learn the difference between Class A, Class B, C properties. Where's kind of the sweet spot? Great place to start. But I'm also not a huge fan of people just reading books,
Yeah.
especially when you're getting started.
Mhm.
I think maybe get going, and then the books come into play as you can apply to look backwards and retrospectively,
Mhm.
and see where your lessons learned and go from there. But a lot of people, if you haven't started, you're probably one of these like analysis paralysis people.
Yes.
I mean, I'm an engineer. We work with a lot of engineers. I see it all the time.
Yep.
Just do grow a pair and like just get going. But
Yeah.
limit your exposure, but get going. Like when I bought my first like out of state rental property in 2012, and
Mhm.
I didn't see it, didn't touch it. I didn't go buy 11 right off the bat. I bought one and I
Mhm.
watched it for a year or two, and then I bought a whole bunch after, right?
Yep.
So get proof of concept and then move swiftly and confidently. But you're not going to learn anything by just reading books and talking to people. Like the 70-20-10 rule, if
Mhm.
people have heard about this, 10% is books and podcasts, 20% is talking to other people. I suppose that's kind of like podcasts too. But the
Mhm.
vast majority of the rubric is 70% is actually getting out there and doing it, making mistakes, but controlled mistakes.
Yeah. And mistakes are a way to learn, and it's the best way for us to learn. And I think as entrepreneurs, that's something we're very good at is making mistakes, trying to see something works, see if the proof of concept works. When it doesn't, pivoting and doing it, going from there. But, I definitely agree. Awesome. Thank you so much, Lane, for being on the podcast today. I really appreciate it. Yep.
Well, thanks for having me, Andrew.
Anytime. Thanks again for joining us on the Hustle and Grind podcast. If you'd like to learn more about Lane, check out the link in the description.